Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. Appreciate you guys joining me. We have a special guest tonight, and we'll get to her shortly and the subject matter that we're going to be talking about. But before that, I just want to introduce our sponsor, not only an advertiser of Peachtree Corners Magazine, but a supporter of the family of podcasts that we do, and that's Hargrave Fiber. They're a company that is big in the Southeast. They're a cable company that provides fast internet connection and business solutions, not only for small businesses, but for enterprise-sized businesses. So check them out. They're not the cable guy. They are really in their community that they are in. They're involved with the communities that they work in. So hargravefiber.com, visit them and thank them. So let's get to our guest. Our guest here tonight is, let's bring her on. Carole, let's get you up here with me. Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
good. How are you?
Good. So Carole is a author journalist. I'm, I'm plugging as an engineer now, so bear with me, everyone. But Carol's an author and journalist. She's a native of Atlanta, lived 30 years here in Gwinnett County, and she has about 6 books under her belt and an award-winning book called Blood in the Soil, which is about the 78 shooting of Larry Flint and his attorney in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Check out that book too. But the book that we're going to be talking about tonight actually is a different book. Uh, Maybe there's some history there and there's some stuff going on there as well. But the book itself that we're going to be talking about is the history of an innovative and remarkable city, the city of Peachtree Corners. 2 years in the making, reaching back to 1777 and up to 2020, and dealing with a lot of history and a lot of families. Some families that people know already, certainly, if not know of the families, they know of the street names of those families.
Right.
So tell us, Carole, a little bit. Let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about, what did it take, and how did you actually come to this part of writing this book 2 years ago?
Oh my goodness. I was honored to have Judy Putnam, the city's communications director, come to me, um, and she was aware of the fact that I was an author and a longtime journalist in the area, and she had come to me with a, a passion of hers, which was preserving the history of the city of Peachtree Corners. And as anybody who is familiar with Gwinnett County, certainly who grew up in or around Gwinnett County, knows um, development here skyrocketed. It just exploded. Really, I want to say in the late 70s, 80s, and has continued, as we all see. And that's been a wonderful thing for this area, for the business community and for residents. The downside to that, as we all know, those of us who love history know, so much is lost to progress. And progress is certainly not a bad thing, but I think, and Judy is certainly of the opinion, that we must know where we came from in order for where we're going to matter, to mean as much as it can. And so she was passionate about preserving the rich history of the Peachtree Corners city and the surrounding the area that surrounded it before Peachtree Corners was actually formed as a city. So she came to me with this project, and I love research. All of my books involve a great deal of research, so I was thrilled, and I, of course, jumped at the opportunity. And here we are, a few years later. It's been an amazing journey and process.
I'm sure. And so many people are involved in a book like this, right? I mean, you
Yes.
have
Oh,
people,
yes.
dozens of people you have to interview. Um, Not only the interview process, but then the writing process. What goes
Mhm.
into it? I mean, I'm sure all the research you did could probably fill several volumes of books, but you had to really fine tune where you were going with this, right? You had to pick the right families that you felt had a good enough story to be able to carry a book like this a bit, right? I mean,
Exactly. The city itself is, we just had this conversation, 9, 10 years old. Um, and as we had laughed and said, a book history book with 9 or 10 years of history is going to be more of a brochure than it is a book. So we said, really, the history of any area reaches far back into its roots. So we said, let's just go back and take a look as far back as we can find historical, factual data about Western Gwinnett County, which, of course, is where Peachtree Corners sits. So
Sure.
we did. We are back in Creek and Cherokee and habitation and early settlers. And as is so true, when the research really hits that sweet spot, the history is fascinating. The stories are fascinating.
Not only that, I think it also feeds into the stories that would come later, right? Kids during the 50s and 60s, 70s, growing up in this area that would find arrowheads in certain places and stuff.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
and walk, and even like, for example, the old broken bridge that's no longer there that crossed the Chattahoochee, when that was built, and then even later when it became rust and decaying bridge, the kids were still jumping off that bridge into the
Yeah.
river.
I mean, this will really, I guess, date myself, but as a teenager, my friends and I would go, and we always went up to Jones Bridge, and you did, you shimmied up and jumped off. Our parents would not have been happy to know that, but that's kind of a rite of passage
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
grew up in this area.
and we were talking a little bit before we started recording about, and I know from friends that Gwinnett County a long time ago was a place that when you were a kid, I think it was during maybe the 50s and 60s, and you thought you had to cross Gwinnett County, and you were like 18 years old, you had your driver's license, your parents would say, go around the county. Don't you dare go through that county, right?
They did. That was a rule
Yeah,
in our household, and there were 7 of us children, so they weren't kidding. I was the next to the youngest, so
wow,
they had it
yeah,
down to a science by then. But yes, we as kids, growing up around here, you always wanted to go to Lake Lanier for
hmm,
one reason or another. And if you live in DeKalb County, you must go through Gwinnett County to get to Hall County. And
right,
we
sure,
were required to drive around Gwinnett because of,
yeah,
it's a lot of the history of the county is not a secret. There were some wild and woolly things that took place here because Gwinnett was so it was sparsely populated. It
hmm,
was um, country. I think that's being generous.
yeah,
It was a sparsely populated. People called it the Wild Wild West. Let's put it that way. I don't know
right,
why they called it West because there's nothing West about it, but
right.
it's just kind of the way things were done in Gwinnett County for a long time. Just bizarre, um, unusual things happened here. I mean, the county is peppered with really interesting, fascinating
Yeah.
events that took place.
And isn't it interesting how we've come up to a point where we are a smart city now on the edge of doing things that other cities are not doing.
Yes.
So it's grown. So let's dig deep a little bit into the history of this area
Okay.
before Peachtree Corners. Obviously, Native Americans habitated this area as well as other European settlers. But
Hmm.
what drew them here? I know the Chattahoochee River was probably a big draw, but tell us a little bit about what you think and what you found that drew settlers here, kept natives here.
Sure. Certainly the river, my goodness. For Native Americans, this was the Chattahoochee River was the lifeblood of the area. So from North Georgia, as the river flows down really to the southernmost part of the state,
Right,
and then west a little bit, that's the banks of the river are where the early Native Americans settled. And as the Europeans started making their way into the New World and then pushing their way south, they brought with them diseases that wiped out a great number of the Native Americans simply because they just had not ever been exposed to them. So then we had tiny gatherings and tribes and groups of people who migrated along the banks of the Chattahoochee, came together south of Gwinnett County. But I think it was, if my memory serves me correctly, 16 different groups of Native Americans came together and they formed the Creek Nation eventually. And it was largely Creek that then settled here in the area that we now know as Gwinnett County. There were Cherokee, but really the Chattahoochee served as a dividing line for the two nations. And so sometimes there were skirmishes over a little territoriality and who's encroaching on whose territory, but typically the Chattahoochee served as a dividing line between the two nations.
And then I say American, they became American later, I guess. European settlers came and they habitated, became residents of this area. How, there were families. Obviously, when we look at Holcomb Bridge Road, we look at Nesbitt Ferry, we look at Medlock Bridge Road. These are just not names just pulled out of a hat, or
Right.
even of recent history. They go back a long ways. What of what families, if you will, were the earliest settlers to this area that
I
we
can
would
tell
know?
you the absolute earliest family were the Medlocks.
Okay.
And I can say that with certainty because Isha Medlock, who was the first recorded Medlock in the area, was a squatter on
Well,
land that the federal government had set aside for strictly for Native Americans.
mm,
And he just decided that he wanted to settle on some of those lands, and he did. So
yeah,
Isha Medlock was the first,
okay.
certainly the first Peachtree Corners family. Although the Medlocks, as we know, goodness, they're in Atlanta. They're let's see, up around and then Forsyth County, and then north of that even. But in this area, Isha Medlock
Hmm.
came 1777, settled in western Gwinnett in what is now Peachtree Corners.
Now, and we should let people know that that's one of the two families that you highlight in the book.
Yes, that's true. So I picked the Medlocks for obvious reasons. Their name is so well known in the area for very good reasons. And they were the first family to settle. The other family that I chose, if you want me to, am I jumping ahead to share
No, no,
that?
you can. Okay.
Okay. The other family is the Nesbitt family. And I chose this family. Of course, there are many important families that settled the area. But the Nesbitt family, the Perry Nesbitt family,
Hmm.
struck me as another group that really needed to be part of the story because the patriarch, well, and the matriarch of that family were born into slavery. They were born before well before the Civil War ended. And in fact, the Grand Patriarch, they actually called the gentleman Perry P. Nesbitt. The family refers to him as Grand. He was also born into slavery and was emancipated at age 9. But he became a prominent landowner in Pinckneyville, Peachtree Corners. And that was highly unusual. I mean, I think we all know that, from
Yeah.
that time period in our history, it was very unusual for someone who had been born into slavery to become um, a prominent landowner. And that was done strictly through work ethic and a love of education. And it was a story that had to be told.
And that's amazing to me. I mean, African American in the south of the Mason-Dixon, and with the things that went on down here
Right.
for a long period of time. Now, obviously there may have been pockets where everything was fine, maybe, but overall, the South was not a friendly place always to African
Right.
Americans and certainly to business owners, unless you had a pocket of, a town that was African American, let's say, or a pocket area like that. So,
Right.
I can appreciate the history that goes there because there was probably a lot of struggles there as well to a degree, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about what you found out about the Nesbitt family and how
Well,
they
I
grew?
can tell you that it was very gratifying for me to see in every single family member with whom I spoke from that family the deep pride and the continued love for education, um, the knowledge of their own family history and the history of the area. That struck me. You really don't see that that often anymore. In my experience, you don't. We are in the overall scheme of things new. Georgia is new. Gwinnett County is new in the overall scheme of history. We're
Right.
very new. So to see a family with such a love and reverence and respect for their ancestors, for their history, for the way, a true work ethic, a dedication to family, and a deep love of education, which to me defines the way the American dream came about for so many here. But it's held dear by every single family member, whether they're young today or, I spoke with people in their 90s. They all share that same thing. So I have a lot of respect for that. And I really enjoyed and felt privileged to share their stories and experiences in this book.
For those that may be joining this live simulcast, or maybe in later as it's on demand, we are speaking to Carole Townsend, author and journalist, and author of the new book that will be coming out. When is that? When is the book coming out?
This
Do we know?
spring, I'm comfortable saying this spring. We are, I hope nobody kills me. We were probably looking at April release.
Okay.
Those are our hopes.
All right.
So COVID has affected so many things.
I
So
would think.
we
Yeah.
are in the final phase of production of the book, which is, of course, the printing.
Right.
So
Okay. That's good. And we're past the proofing part, so that's always good.
oh my goodness.
And anyone that knows about proofing knows
Oh
that
my gosh,
proofing
yes.
is an adventure all by itself.
Yes.
Grammarly does not work.
Not for everything. No, it does
No,
not.
nope. So the history of an innovative and remarkable city is the name of the book, and that'll be coming out this spring, we'll say. But there's other things within the book. We talked about the Medlock family and the Nesbits. Obviously, you learned also a lot about the railroad, the agriculture, stagecoach, post office, the militias, the Honeycutt Inn. Can you tell? Because that was like one thing that sort of stuck out. Can you tell us a little bit why that stuck out?
So when Pinckneyville was first really a gathering of families, so we are talking late 1700s. An interesting thing that I learned, I guess I knew this, but it was kind of solidified for me in this research. So when the settlers trickled south, and then they came to Georgia, and there were many draws. Once they found out about the gold, that was up in North Georgia. That was a big draw. Of course, the Chattahoochee, this perfect climate for growing certain crops, corn front and center. They love the corn, loves the humidity, the red clay soil. So here these people come and first trickled in, and then the populations in these little centers grew. Well, Pinckneyville was a gathering of families and individuals, and the first to be built typically in these little towns was a saloon. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But revenue. It was a big revenue generator. So
the saloons were also hotels, maybe?
Well, there was a saloon that was adjacent to the Honeycutt Inn, and in fact, some accounts say it was inside the inn. Some say it was adjacent. More accounts that I've read say that it was actually adjacent to the Honeycutt Inn. So you had your saloon, then typically the church, and then in Pinckneyville's case came the Honeycutt Inn, built by, of course, the Honeycutt family. So it was hand-hewn boards, nails and wooden pegs that were hand-fashioned. Mr. Honeycutt was a blacksmith by trade. And they tell me, so we know where, the nursery is. Is it Benson?
Yes, the Benson.
Okay, the Bentley. The nursery.
Bridge.
I
On Medlock
apologize.
Bridge Road,
I
we're
can
talking
flip
about.
through my working copy here, but you don't want to wait for me
No,
to
no.
do that.
We're good.
Bentley's Nursery, I
Yeah.
believe. So there's a storage place right next to the nursery. Is that ringing a bell? That's a
Yeah.
public
Mm-hmm.
storage or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep. Medlock Bridge.
So
I think that's that road.
yes. So they tell me that still, if you go back on the site where the public storage place is and you dig around a little bit, you're going to find some of these hand-fashioned nails and wooden beams that made up part of the Honeycutt Inn. So the inn was a stagecoach stop. So that is an indication that Pinckneyville was on the map already way before, um, some accounts by date, by, noting the gathering of people here is
Right.
second oldest. It wasn't actually a city, but it's been around for a long time. So the Honeycutt Inn was a stagecoach stop. One of the interesting things, and I'll have to stop myself, I don't want to give all the interesting stuff away, but so it was built when, this was still very raw and unsettled land as far as the English European settlers knew. So, and being right here at the river, the Cherokee and the Creek would get into these skirmishes every now and then. You're on my side, you're on your side, and some would try to take a little bit of land on one side of the Chattahoochee, and then there would be retaliation. So in the front porch of the Honeycutt Inn was built a big trap door so that people could hide, people staying in the inn or the guy driving the stagecoach or whoever needed to take refuge could hide open that trap door and hide under the porch just in case one of these skirmishes broke out, and you're in the line of fire.
Yeah.
So,
you want to get away from that.
That was
Yeah.
a long way to go about telling that story.
That's an
but
interesting.
I thought
There's
that
always
was
the
just,
little details like that, though, right?
yeah. I'm embarrassed. I'm gonna find this family's name because I don't want to, but you can go ahead and ask me another question.
Sure,
That
sure.
owns
So,
the nursery. It's the Bentleys.
I think it's the Bentleys. Yes, I think that is.
I am so sorry. It was one of
No,
those
no,
senior moments. Forgive me.
it's all right. I think you're correct. It is the Bentleys. But let's move on a little bit. We could talk about Neely Farm because Frank Neely was an interesting personality also.
Right.
Right, cutting edge agricultural practices, and how he dealt with his farm workers, and of course there's the big house and the clubhouse now at Neely Farm. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, Neely himself, I mean, my goodness, I'm sure books have been written about him. He's certainly memorialized down at Georgia Tech, he and his wife both. Georgia Tech graduated engineer. Goodness gracious, his list of accomplishments, he was on the board of Rich's department store, the Federal Reserve. His list of accomplishments is a mile long. And again, if I looked it up, I could be more specific. But the man was just a powerhouse. He was, I had the pleasure of speaking with his granddaughter, and she said he was very intense, but he was so bright. It was almost as though he couldn't contain it. He constantly had to be involved in something that was bigger than life. And he certainly was. He bought land out in what is now Peachtree Corners, what we know as the subdivision Neely Farm, as to build a getaway, a weekend retreat for his family, because his work in the city of Atlanta was very intense and very demanding. And so he built this farm. It was a dairy farm. He also raised pigs on the farm, but they weren't just any cows and any pigs. They were exceptional, Guernseys and Holstein cows. He worked with the University of Georgia on actually trying to crossbreed the two, because one, and I'm probably going to get this backwards. One of the cows was known for the high fat content of the milk, and the other was known for just the overall nutritional value of the milk, I believe. But anyway, he was trying to crossbreed those two to see if he could come up with, this super product of the milk. And even the pigs were not normal. They were called Tamworths, and they could forage on their own. They could go out because there was a lot of the property was wooded. They could just go on their own out into the woods and forage and feed themselves, basically. But there was an unusual looking reddish hair on the pigs. And anyway, so
Not your normal
he did just over the top. But he worked with UGA because he had seen so many farms, especially in Georgia, with rutted, the Georgia clay and the rain runoff and the ruts that you see in the dirt, and he didn't want that. So they had said, you need to do two things. You terrace your fields, which he did, and you get cows to fertilize the earth, which he also did. Okay. So it was a working dairy farm, but it was I'm sorry.
Up until when, actually? Was that up until like the 60s, I guess, as a working farm?
70s? I don't know that it was as recent as the 60s. I want to say probably 50s.
50s.
Okay. Yeah, and I would have to verify the dates, but probably the 50s. But as was true of so many of the farms, they not only produced say a dairy farm, it wasn't just milk and it wasn't just the pigs, there were gardens, vegetable gardens, and the families, there were 7 families that lived on the farm and worked the farm. Interestingly enough, some of the Nesbit descendants that are featured in the book worked Neelys farm, Frank Neely's farm. And they knew a great deal about what their jobs were. But they would have huge gardens, so canning, preserving, and eventually freezing became part of their collection of knowledge. But that was true of pretty much every farm, that you would find during that time period. They were self-sufficient.
So even though Frank Neely wanted to get away from all the city stress, he decided that farm stress
came
was
out
okay,
here and started some country stress. And in fact, his wife would fuss at him about that, according to Neely's granddaughter, Ms. Eve Hoffman, who so graciously spent a good deal of time with me. She and her brother Nathan spent a lot of time with me recollecting their years growing up, because Mr. Neely built their mother, his daughter, a house, which is known, I think, still commonly as the Dean House. That was where they grew up with their mother. And so their stories were just...
Now, they're still living? Are they still living in Neely Farm?
Ms. Hoffman is. She does. She doesn't live in the subdivision. She lives on a piece of the part of the property that did belong to her grandfather.
Right. So lots of history here. We even had a militia post at one point, right? Militia post 406.
Militia post 406, Pinckneyville, yes. So all of these things, plus the fact that there was a post office in Pinckneyville, really spoke to the importance of the settlement of Pinckneyville, which of course evolved in Peachtree Corners.
Interestingly enough, I mean, through Gwinnett County, from the little I know about the history, a lot of the train station, like Norcross, Duluth, I think Sugar Hill, maybe even or Beaufort, that the trains would run through those towns, and there were train stops, right?
Right.
And now, those downtown areas during the 80s and 90s, try to come back also, because at one point there were train stops, even in Norcross. I mean, train runs through it. The train stop itself, the depot, is now a restaurant, or was a restaurant. But so seeing that Pinckneyville, a stagecoach stop, and all these other things near where the trains were running through, but they were still a place of traffic, if you will.
Right.
It's an interesting thing that this is where we're coming out of, right?
Right. And in truth, when the railroad came through, and it went through Norcross. Um, People who were business owners in the Pinckneyville area, Western Gwinnett County, of course, all went toward or to Norcross because that was the fastest transportation. That was the latest and
Sure.
greatest. You could get to Atlanta in no time and get back. So the Western Gwinnett County area was certainly agricultural at first, of course. Then businesses started to open and thrive, and then the railroad came through, and then it went back largely agricultural for a long time. And I will say that was certainly the 50s and 60s. It was still very rural.
And then we come up to, I know because of the magazine, because of the podcasts I've done over the last 3 years, we've talked a lot about Technology Park, Paul Duke, all that development that came afterwards, technology, a lot of the major companies that have been here that still continue to grow here that are high-tech companies. But before the technology, and maybe after the farming, what did we see? Was there anything, between that, between the farming part and the high-tech part of the 70s later, I guess?
I want to say once, Western Gwinnett County stayed very rural. There wasn't even much infrastructure here in the early 60s, or I say here in Peachtree Corners in Western Gwinnett County,
Right.
even, as recent as the early 60s, which is shocking. If you see Gwinnett County today, you can't
Sure.
imagine that square inch that's not fully developed. Um,
Yeah.
I think when Paul Duke, this young, bright engineer that came out of Georgia Tech, saw that when Georgia Tech engineers graduated, their bags were already packed to go elsewhere. They were leaving Georgia. We all knew that for a fact. There was nothing for them to do here, or very little. And he wanted to change that. He and his wife lived in Atlanta. But he worked for L.B. Foster for a while in his early career, and part of his job with them was to acquire properties on which to build their facilities. And as a result of those responsibilities, he ended up in Western Gwinnett County, and he immediately dubbed it God's country. He thought it was the most beautiful place he had ever seen. And that's when he got the idea to build this cutting edge technology campus or business campus that with a focus on technology to attract those engineers. He wanted to build this beautiful campus. He wanted to surround it with neighborhoods that would appeal to engineers and jobs of that caliber, I guess, for lack of a better word. He wanted to build a community that would attract and keep engineers. So he began amassing the land to do that. And as we all know, I mean, gosh, I've lived here forever. I remember when Technology Park was developed and, when businesses started moving in, we thought, and I remember my parents saying, who on earth is going to locate a business way out there in the sticks? Who's going to make that drive? And of course, we see the answer to that. It was hugely successful.
It certainly, I think, and it's evolved, right? And it's interesting how Georgia Tech grads, if you will, from Georgia Tech, UGA, have all helped the development of this whole area. How technology back then, Hayes Modem, companies that people are not familiar with today, unless they're old enough to remember dialing to AOL through a
Right,
modem,
right,
or even laser printers. I mean, they were developed here as well, right?
right,
So those are just some of the technology. And now we're moving into the smart city, right? The cutting edge, innovative city of tomorrow, hopefully one day.
right,
Because things do change, right? We're an urban area. We're not that farm area we were not too
right.
long ago. And I think when the Olympics came in '96, that even accelerated part of what was developing here, right? Because it drove a a lot of technology, a lot of business growth. I remember coming here in '95. If you were a salesperson back then, you didn't know. You don't need to know how to sell. You just needed to get through the door to be able to sell. Anyone could sell. It was amazing. Of course, there was the shakeout later, and
Right,
stuff in 2008 later and things. But we continue to grow, right? So this history is still unfolding in front of us.
right.
Um, do you have any takeaways, any favorite parts of the book that you want to share with us?
Um, I will say that talking with members of both of the families that
Hmm.
are spotlighted in the book was that was an experience. It's a once in a lifetime thing to hear history being really narrated for you. I mean, the people with whom I spoke with a 101-year-old gentleman, a member of the Nesbitt family who worked on Frank Neely's farm.
Hmm.
Sharp as a tack, wonderful memory, told me some stories that just, I don't know, just listening to him tell the stories puts you there,
Right.
100 years ago, and you can smell the dirt, and you can see the pride he took in his work, and it was just, um, that to me is really where your research is. It's not, you're not talking at people anymore, you are there in it. And it's my sincere hope that readers feel the same way when they read some of those accounts that we share in the book. It's just, um waiting even 5 years, and this is, I really am getting around to answering your question. My
Hmm.
takeaway from this book is the fact that Peachtree Corners is undisputedly the crown jewel of Gwinnett County. I mean, with what's going on there now, the vision and everything it took to take Technology Park, which was state of the art in the late 60s and 70s,
Hmm.
and it really had become kind of a dinosaur. When
Yes.
Peachtree Corners became a city, city leaders were presented with that really more as a problem than a solution for the city. The American dream today is not what it was in the late
Yep.
60s and 70s. Millennials, the workforce now, they don't want the big house and the two cars in the driveway and the 2.2 kids, and they don't want that. They want smaller, more efficient housing. They want walkability. They want, um, and the careers are different. I mean, Paul Duke, I'm not sure, as visionary as he was, I'm not sure even he could have understood where technology was going to go
Yeah.
by this time. So, Technology Park has been reimagined, and we've got the Curiosity Lab, which is
Right.
just, it's an example for the world, not just for the nation, but for the world.
Hmm.
So you've got this city that puts so much stock in progress and technology and being cutting edge, paying homage to its history, because the people in the city who made the decision to move forward with this book knew that if we didn't get all this on paper, so to
Hmm.
speak, it would be gone. And the stories that the people shared with me for this book would be nothing but myths and urban legends, and lost, just lost with the last breath of some of these family members. So I have such respect. This was not an easy project, and
I'm sure.
it's something that is so worthwhile. And now we've got it documented, and maybe in another 50 to 100 years somebody will be brave enough to come along and add to it. And I'm sure that Peachtree Corners will have amazing things to add to it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, innovative and remarkable certainly describes the city, but for them to reach back into their past and give it this much effort, I think is truly remarkable.
I agree, and things are still unfolding. COVID-19 has really continued to change the way the city has to adapt even further, right?
Right.
Um, because of people staying home, because of a year of pandemic, how does traffic change dwellings, how people live and stuff? So ever evolving. history needs to be put down on paper, though, or on a recorded device or on digital device, right?
Right.
To be able to keep that history archived. So I'm
Right.
glad, yeah, I'm glad that the city did this, that you were able to do this. I know it's a two year struggle of getting this and being able to put everything down in a book. It's not easy. So I respect your
Well,
abilities to be able to get it done.
thank you. It was certainly a team effort.
I'm sure.
And I will say too, we see so many city history books popping up here and there. This book is truly organic. We didn't run down to the state archives and pull all the pictures we could from Western Gwinnett County and put captions and call it a
Right.
book. We went to the families, and these are family photos. Some are tintypes that we've got in this book.
Yeah.
When I don't know, are we out of time? I have a cute
No,
story to
you're good.
share.
A couple
So
more
there's
minutes.
a lady named Jane Garner who was a member of the Medlock family, and
Oh,
she, my goodness, she was 94 when she and I first started talking
wow.
for the purposes of writing this book. And she shared with me hundreds of family photos, as the Nesbits did. But she had pulled out a few tintypes. Uh, and there were two, I think, that we were actually able to use in the book. And some were really good photos, but she and her siblings had some of the tintypes were photos of infant babies. She and her siblings had drawn glasses and mustaches on the babies. So, just like all kids do with some family photos, and then you
Sure.
get in trouble for it. But I thought, the more things change, again, the more they stay the same. I thought it was so funny that they had done that
Yeah,
to these
kids are
tintype
kids, no
photos.
matter. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure if they had Sharpies back then, they would have really done a job. So, listen,
I
we've
thought that
been.
was cute.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation, though. Can't wait. I can't wait to see the book. Going to be getting my copy. Hopefully, it's sometime this spring when it comes out. I know it's at
Yes,
printers. We've
no
talked
doubt.
about that. So we've been together here with Carole Townsend, author, journalist, the person that tackled, along with a team of people, but she's the point person on this, the book, The History of an Innovative and Remarkable City, a history going from 1777 to 2020,
Right.
the 2 year struggle of putting that history on paper. I'm sure you have even recorded recordings of interviews of that, uh, which would be interesting to hear even. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's been a good interview. I appreciate you spending the time with me doing this, and thank you. And everyone else that's listening to this, go to the city website. But you'll know that the book will be out because we're going to let you know. Plus, Peachtree Corners Magazine with the April-May edition, I believe, we're going to have an excerpt from the book. So look for that, and we'll have more information about when that book's available and pre-sales if you want to be able to purchase a copy of it as well. So, but thank you, Carole. Appreciate you being
Thank
with me.
you. This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be able to talk about it.
Sure, so am I. I mean, this was great. Love